a bad bill from that perspective, Mr Speaker.
I call Gareth Hughes.
Kia ora, Mr Speaker. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou kia ora. I rise to support this legislation, but look, I'm worried about the National Party. I really am, because what we've seen just in the last week is a party which isn't competing on leadership, it's not competing on policy, it's not competing on solutions. In fact, they're looking to some of the worst political actors around the world. What we're seeing is a party that's not embracing intellectual integrity. We're seeing ridiculous statements in the House just in the last 10 minutes. We heard Judith Collins say this government is taxing everything that moves. That's patently ridiculous. We see Amy Adams saying the government who hates landlords. That's patently ridiculous. A party that's dog whistling on international migration, that's jumping the shark, avoiding a cross-party solution on medicinal cannabis by coming up with these ideas of legalisation by stealth. There is no intellectual integrity from this party. It's the fake news we decry, but we're seeing it on this side of the House. And when it comes to tax, I wish this party just had the intellectual honesty to point to the evidence. And the OECD says we are a low-tax country. In fact, we're ranked 25th in terms of our tax to GDP. This isn't a country that taxes everything that moves. In fact, we're a low-tax country, a tax country where the burden falls on the bulk of New Zealand workers. Now, remember, it was the last government that was quite prepared to lower the tax rate for the rich. You know, you look across the ditch, top's tax rate 45%. Look at the United Kingdom under a Conservative government, top tax rate 45%. They lowered it to 33%. So the highest earners, including many in this House, got a tax break. But what did they do to the poorest, most vulnerable Kiwis? They saw an increase in the progressive GST tax. So I'm not going to be here lectured on tax from this party that doesn't have the intellectual honesty to tell the truth, to point to the experts, to point to the research. Because what we know is the result of their policies decision was to see rubbish running down the rules of Middlemore, our schools in a funding crisis, a lack of investment in infrastructure for our country to go forward. So that's my challenge to the National Party. Put aside the fake news, put aside the slogans and making stuff up. Let's have a debate about the actual issues. And that's why I'm proud to support this legislation, because there's 5 key highlights, 5 key benefits for everyday New Zealanders and the New Zealand economy. Now, the first is the GST changes for low-value incomes for products less than $1,000. Now, I was only 5 when the GST Act was written back in 1986, and there Kiwis weren't importing low-value items, so it made sense because the cost of compliance would have been ridiculously high for someone importing a product, you know, $400, $800. But what we do know is, thanks to the internet economy that's come along since then, is Kiwis are importing a huge amount of products from overseas. So it makes sense not to have a tax break for that. What we know is it is going to raise about $80 to $140 million a year. That gives you a sense of the scale of how many products Kiwis are now importing under that threshold. This makes a huge amount of sense. It's going to help those 60,000 plus workers in our retail sector. It's going to be great news for them. When it comes to our rental market, the ring-fencing losses for residential properties really redresses the tax benefit that those investors have. Really, it's a subsidy, right? It's the renters who are paying more in their income tax to make up for the tax benefits the landlords get when they do the losses. Now, it's not going the whole hog. In fact, it's only making sure that the losses are only up to the income for the year. But what it is going to mean is we're going to redress the unlevel playing field, to make sure that those first home buyers aren't being pulled down. Actually, this is a government focused on giving first home buyers a leg up. So a level playing field is going to help those first home buyers. Now, this is so important for young New Zealanders, because what we have seen after 9 years of National, a party that ignored the housing crisis, that said it wasn't a housing crisis, that was selling state houses in the middle of a housing crisis, has seen the dream of Kiwi home ownership for particularly young New Zealanders fade away. This is a government which is acting, which is making a difference, and it's by doing it in a fair, reasonable manner. Now, the third thing, and I think this is a great step forward, and I hope it acts as a precedent in other legislation and government department practices, it enshrines the use of te reo language in the Inland Revenue Department records. Now, this is updating the Tax Administration Act 94 and the GST Act 1985. I think this is a wonderful step forward, and I'd love to see the day where any government department a citizen could walk into, any record a government takes, can be given in te reo Māori, a great legacy, a taonga which exists here and nowhere else. This is a fantastic step forward. When it comes to student loans, Again, I don't want to keep playing politics and taking it back to the problems of the last government, but they did have 9 years to sort out the problem of the IRD's antiquated, old-fashioned technology. Now, they spent, I believe it was $1.5 billion, absolutely mismanaged the process, took much more longer than needed, cost lots more than was needed, but what it meant was that every year the hundreds of thousands of Kiwis with student loans would get a letter in the mail saying how much interest they had to pay on their student loan. That was despite the policy of this country changing all the way back in the mid-2000s, 2006 I believe, and still on every New Zealand student loan recipient's bill it had the interest. Now, this was incredibly, I think, distressing for people who couldn't understand why on earth was interest that was there. Now, it was wiped subsequently, but simply because of antiquated technology, we were giving Kiwis confusing and, frankly, troubling information. So it's wonderful now that thanks to modern IT systems, we could literally do what the government's policy is, which is not apply interest on student loans. A fantastic step forward for reasonableness and common sense. Now, lastly, this won't affect many Kiwis, but for those it does affect, it affects them in a deeply personal and visceral way. Now, what it does is exempt child support payments for those who had a baby and were a victim of sexual offences. Now, there had only been 2 cases in the last 12 years because a conviction had to be levied for those exemptions to be applied by the Commissioner of Inland Revenue. What this is doing now is giving the Commissioner the discretion to apply it without a conviction, but where it's not reasonably in doubt. This is a tremendous step forward because we know so many, the scourge of sexual violence and abuse, which sadly afflicts our country, often these cases don't go to the police and often they don't go to court. So this is a very positive step forward for few people, but it will be deeply felt and deeply benefit them. So look, this is a bill which the Green Party wholeheartedly supports. What we want to do is have a fair tax system which sees New Zealand have enough money to invest in education, to invest in housing, to invest in the services we have, and also one that respects the first language of New Zealand, te reo Māori, that gives students a fair go. So all in all, this is a fantastic bill, and I just urge the National Party to be honest, to be measured. What we don't want to see is the type of politics which is afflicting other countries. Let's have a debate about the issues and the facts, not about some of the made-up stuff.
Speaker.
Ian McKelvey.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to